Hello, it's Brad Laurie, or BlockchainBrad, and today we're speaking about all things HiFi. And originally, you may have known it as Mainframe. And to do that, we have Doug Leonard here. He is the CEO. There is no one better to really inform us about what HiFi are doing. So, Doug, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me on, Brad.
You're very welcome, mate. Now, in the name of transparency, it's important all of you know I have no financial position in HiFi or in the mainframe token, which is also the MFT. And also, this is entirely free. There's no compensation for this information. It's about providing us all, including me, information from the source, and that's from Doug himself. So, Doug, as the CEO, thank you for making time once again. Now, lending protocols are pretty hot right now. DeFi has been a buzzword for some time, perhaps an overused narrative in some respects, but we're going to dig deep into the fundamentals and really explore the why of DeFi, the why of HiFi, and really the guts and what you stand for, especially considering these rebrandings that have happened. So let's start off with that point of the lending protocol itself. Actually, no, let's start with you firstly. My apologies.
Sure.
Can you just give us, as a CEO, obviously needs key skill sets. So let's start there with how you can lead this effectively. What's your background and what puts you in the right position to make this work long term?
Yeah, you bet. So I originally joined Mainframe as an engineer, and quickly, it was known that I was the one who was actually, borrowing using, Ethereum and MakerDAO to purchase my own minivan. And so, I was using it in real life and trying to, make crypto more a part of, my everyday. And so whenever we had questions about, okay, well, what are users actually doing? The team would turn more and more to me. And so my would start my transition from like, okay, Doug is an engineer to Doug is like really helping with the day-to-day strategy of Mainframe. And so, some of the first dApps that we really started playing with when we were building Mainframe OS was all around DeFi, and they were tools that I wanted to have built as I, took out a large loan to purchase this minivan, and I didn't want to get liquidated. And so we started building tools to help around that. And then, really, I actually would step away from Mainframe for a period of time. And then Mick would call me back up, the CEO at the time, and say, hey, Doug, we are headed, for a pivot into DeFi. We think you're the right guy for the job. And, we've worked with you for a long time. And so we want you to close down the startup that you were working on and come and run our show over here. And so that's really how we got to where we are today.
I see. So can I just ask you, obviously I've spoken to Mick before in relation to Mainframe. So firstly, why the pivot? And also where's Mick's role in this position as well? Because obviously he was a key spokesperson for Mainframe. Yeah,
you bet. So right now, Mick has basically gone and started a neobank that is going to bridge the two worlds of crypto and centralized finance. So why are we launching into DeFi? Well, quite frankly, it's because when we built our decentralized, unstoppable chat application, nobody cared and nobody wanted to use it. And so we quickly scrambled and tried to pivot and to create Mainframe OS, and something else happened. Nobody cared. And nobody wanted it. And so, when you deliver two products that people gave you millions of dollars to actually build, and then they don't show up to actually use it, you've got to start scratching your head and saying, you know what, where is the utility in the space? Where is the space headed? And where do we want to position ourselves? Because, we feel like we've built a really good team and we want to leverage them. And so Mick moved on and he's doing this bridge between CeFi and DeFi, and then he put me in charge of building this DeFi component. And the hope is one day there's going to be sort of a partnership there where they can leverage us in our lending protocol.
That's what I thought might be happening, because Mick is an entrepreneur by nature. He's savvy in this space, and he can be quite aggressive when it comes to really making sure that he's at the front pole position of crypto. And I mean that respectfully. He really wants that key position and key stake in the space, and he'll do anything he can really to engage the community and also have protocols that make sense. So the CeFi DeFi with him makes a lot of sense right now, because obviously it's about usership. Now, in your case, it's all about that DeFi aspect, which is interesting because the possibilities of synergies, partnerships, and integrations later. But I guess I wanted to ask you, why do HiFi in the context of MFT, and Mainframe, when you could have technically launched something entirely new? Was it because precisely, as you said, you want to leverage what you already have with the user base, with the community?
Yeah. So, I mean, the funds that we have, that we've been able to build our team and to take these, two now failed products, those funds weren't our own. That came from our token generation event where we raised funds from accredited investors and issued a token. And so it would be disingenuous to not fully pursue all the opportunities we could with the resources that the community had given to us. And so quite honestly, it never really crossed our minds as an option to give up on mainframe. And so, quite frankly, it's like, well, since we have the resources and we love doing this, why would we not keep, marching forward and trying to find product market fit?
Well, Doug, let's talk about that. So you're the CEO, the team's changed over time. So when you say we, I think naturally the community also are considering what that actually means. So if the team has morphed, can you tell us a bit more about that? I mean, again, you clarified Mick's position. Other members, as I understand, have changed or over time. So how can we be sure that some of the team haven't also left? How can we be sure some of the backers haven't left? This is important, I think, for the community to know.
Yeah, so to be blunt, some of the team, actually, the entire team has left, and in fact, many backers have also left. Lots of people have given up a mainframe, and for good reason. We delivered something that nobody wanted, and so they're not wrong to have moved on. But because in large part because of how Mick managed our treasury and in passing it off to me, there's still resources here. So since so I've been in as CEO for about 12 months. And we have had 100% full turnover of our employees. So that is that not a single employee that was with us prior is with us now. And when I was rebuilding our team from scratch, I wanted one thing. I needed to purchase confidence, and I needed to purchase, reputation. And so we went after Sablier. We brought on Paul in this Aqua hire. And so at the time, Sablier had been on mainnet for over 18 months, bug-free, exploit-free. And so that's the type of confidence we wanted to bring into our team. And so then we, with Paul at the head of our engineering team, we've added several more. And if you watch my last, our launch video, you'll watch me introduce each member of that team. Now, Mick in his role. So Mick has never been, you describe it as quite aggressive. You're absolutely right. Mick is a risk taker. Mick has always wanted to be on the bleeding edge. And he remains our largest MFT holder. He's our largest equity holder at Mainframe, and he is our director of the board. So as chairman of the board of directors, he has not our contact is probably like once or twice a week, but he's directly plugged in. He still has a large stake in Mainframe and a large alignment. And that's why I feel confident that Genesis Block and Mainframe, there's going to be something there one day. We don't comment on what we imagine it's going to be, but we just kind of leave it there until they finish launching, until we get through our public beta. But you start to see things surfacing and people will be able to put it together pretty easy.
Well said, and I think it makes sense. Obviously, if he has a vested interest in the long-term longevity and success of HiFi, of course, he's going to do everything in his power and his position with the CFI DeFi initiative he has to bring to the fore what you're doing. But I guess I wanted to ask, before we get stuck into the protocol itself, really digging deep into the lending aspect, which I think is most important, I just wanted to touch on the question of backers for a moment, because you mentioned that Mick is still there, he's right beside you, and that's been clarified. Many people would want to have known that. But what about the other backers? Some of those were big names that came forth. I'd love it if you could even be transparent enough to mention some of them. I don't believe some of them are still with you, and that concerns me, because some of these were big names that argue that they do their due diligence, they stay long-term, but they didn't. So what are your thoughts on that? Let's get real about this. Let's name some names. Let's acknowledge this, and let's move forward, because you have restructured all of this so that you can be a legitimate entry into DeFi's protocols.
Yeah. So off the top of my head, one of our biggest backers and biggest fans is Michael Arrington from Arrington XRP. So I get on the phone with Michael probably 3 or 4 times a year. And we chat about where the protocol is, what we're doing, how he can help, and there's a couple other backers. There's actually been more larger name backers, which we haven't really communicated with them about, like a PR release on it yet. But if you look,
may I interrupt and just ask, do they do much at all? I mean, you mentioned Michael in your interaction with him, but do they do, excuse me, that much at all when it comes to beyond capital injection? Because they're supposed to. They're supposed to offer resources, support long-term, engagement as you build out the narrative and as you build out the plan for the long term.
Yeah.
So teach us more about what it's like on the other side.
So typically every large backer has a team of helpers, a team of resources that we get direct access to. So I've got chat rooms open right now with our largest backers that we tried to lean on. So right now, one of the things that we are leveraging these guys for is our token economics. So while I won't comment beyond like, just saying that that's what we're working on, but these guys have excellent perspective because of the number of projects, the amount of due diligence they've done. And whereas like, our team is so focused on what's right in front of us, they can bring a broader perspective on, well, how is this going to fit into, the other lending protocols, the variable rates, the AVEs, the compounds. And so they are very, very helpful whenever we need to step back. But getting into the nitty gritty of I don't rely on them for code audits. I don't rely on them for these types of things. But it is their research and the perspective that their team brings. I've got direct chat rooms that I reach out to them.
I guess I just wanted to touch on that because I wanted to know if many of them were still around. Because often, as we've known in the past from 2017 beyond, some of them have just dumped and left and moved on to other endeavors, so I guess financial focuses. So can you guarantee that there are others that are still there that haven't dumped, as you've mentioned with Mick, and you made that clear, so that we can have the confidence that those resources with those capital firms are still viable, are still being utilized actively? Because obviously if they're not invested for the long term now, they're not going to offer those resources.
So I think if we had some specific names, I could comment on them. But off the top of my head, we've had some major players join and who just purchased their MFT off of Binance, like most everybody else. Right. But in terms of people abandoning that entirely, yeah, I'm sure there's a couple, and I would have to actually go and look at our records for exactly who they are. But every single one of them remains in our network and available to us. But the only incentive that you can really count on, and one of the things that actually makes MFT and where the token is at right now unique, is that anybody who's here is here because they want to be here. And so specific holdings on specific investors, after their tokens vested, there's nothing that I can do to pressure them to hold on, especially at the vision having changed. So, in my mind, when you look at our market cap compared to AVE or compounds with over 100x difference, and having us already done a 20x in the last 12 months since I took over, you got to wonder, either they're not paying attention or they're just going to miss an opportunity, which I'm fine with. People are going to miss it, and I don't care. I don't have time to sit there and babysit them in their bags.
Right. And, to be honest with you as well, I mean, we've both been in this industry for some time. And when you see that price discovery, often you question the term itself. But when it comes to trying to affect a real utility, affect a real DeFi protocol, this gets exciting if, in fact, those who are not interested in supporting you long term have left. Because that's when the really exciting time happens. The magic happens where you can start to showcase the proof of the utility. So let's start there, for the discussion of the tech, because that's what really matters. Now, the lending protocol, that's the focus right now. You've added features, things like fixed rates, fixed term borrowing against crypto, that instant liquidity claim as well. So teach us a bit more about this protocol itself. What sets it apart? What makes it unique? What makes it so successful as it's been in terms of that 20x you mentioned? Because I want to find out if that's really utility driven or if that's hype driven from the back end of crypto.
So my personal opinion is this: right now, MFT does not have utility because we're not doing anything with it. The people who are purchasing MFT are making a bet on the fact that my compensation and alignment is that if MFT goes up, well, I make more money, and so they want to hold on to it because I have not fully vested. I've got several years of vesting out in front of me, and so I benefit from that. So there's an alignment of incentives there. But the obvious way in which we're able to grab utility for MFT is, one, step one is to create a value capture mechanism. And a very obvious one is origination fees on loans, okay? So Aave has this, right? But they basically turned it off, effectively turned it off. And in fact, if I had implemented it in the last version of our protocol, we would have also turned it off. And the reason why is because we're in a growth phase. We're all competing for market share. And so even in the next iteration of our protocol, we were discussing it. And in fact, we will create one version of the smart contract that has the fee mechanism, the value capture mechanism, and one version that does not. And because of where gas prices are, we'll deploy the one that does not, but we'll just say like, look, the day that the day that governance wants to add it, it's there. It's just like Uniswap. You can flip the switch and it turns on. And so, the idea is that it is speculation at this point. But I think the idea that we haven't abandoned MFT at this point. There's no sense in abandoning it now, and especially with what it's done for our treasury. Mainframe is in.
I have to say, and I apologize for interrupting, but I really appreciate this transparency, because what you're essentially saying is that I'm the CEO and the bets made right now are pre-utility. And I use that word very clearly and concisely because really, if you're moving towards the utility of this protocol and we're seeing you build this roadmap, which we're going to discuss through the beta and beyond, really people are paying attention to that given the success of other protocols like Aave. So I think that's really where the speculation is coming in. So we need to explore the preparations for that roadmap to where you eventually get to that point where you can prove that utility. So let's go back. So teach us where you're at now, and anything you want to reference in terms of building up the quality, integrity of the code and the protocol, because that's the bedrock before you even get to utility.
So I'll be quite frank. Mainframe took a big bet on myself and Paul. Paul is the key engineer here who helped build the first version of the core protocol. And we went all in on MFT way back when it was down at 1/10 of a cent. And so we have seen massive value appreciation, and we've been able to exit into stablecoin so that we can last through another bear market, no problem. And in fact, we feel no rush to need to get something out, to get the price moving. Like this is just not a consideration. And so we've built out our team to where we've got more than, I think we're at 8 on our team, most of them engineers. And we're in a position for one, we want to experiment. We want to push the boundaries of what can be considered collateral and what, and some experiments within DeFi. So you'll see some exciting things over the next year from us on that regard. We're forking our own protocol so that we can have separate safe iterations for these types of experiments. And so in terms of like, all right, we're pre-utility, right? And we're in growth phase. We're sitting pretty in terms of our treasury. We have more resources now than we've ever had, which translates to we have a higher probability of success than we ever had before. So in terms of like that value capture, because we can be patient there, we're able to just, we don't have to chase whatever's shiny. We're going to do some really fun experiments. I think people are going to really enjoy participating in them. Then we've got our core protocol that, the version that you can go and interact with now, but we have set the economics such that it doesn't quite make sense if you're a serious lender or borrower. And that's important because I am uninterested in taking risks with other people's money until I'm fully confident about it. And so it's effectively a $250,000 bug bounty. If you can take the money, if you can go and get it, you should. And I want you to today, while there's only 250K, not when there's 250 million.
Okay, so you built in strong incentives initially. What was interesting also, you said that you have had a large stake in the MFT token for some time. So that makes me think immediately, okay, you mentioned before you want to leverage all of the different resources, the community, even the system that's being built as the bedrock for Mainframe and build upon that. All of that makes sense to me. But then we see the context also, Doug, of the launch pads. We see the prospects of DeFi and launching your own. You could have done your own token as well. So I want to clarify this because you're mentioning some really interesting things also about the incentive rather than having, this serious approach initially, you're in that beta. So just try and paint the picture of more specifically, why not just launch with all of the hype right now in a launch pad with your own thing? You've got the team here, you've got the resources, you've had Mick, you could have done that. What's the key benefit for you to have done this through Mainframe's sort of initial start and then morph into what is now this DeFi lending protocol?
Well, about every month, there's a DeFi exploit. and people only are really going to give you one chance. And I'm not interested in making bets with other people's money. I enjoy speculating myself, but I'm uninterested in taking my dad, who is lending on our platform, and risking his retirement. I think I just take that too seriously. We look at, I don't know how familiar you are with how these the audits work, but good code auditors are far and few between. And as we discuss internally as a team, the only true audit is time itself. And so our philosophy on developing is just different than other teams, because you look at Sablier, when Mainframe purchased Sablier, it maybe had $1 million in TVL, but it had over 18 months of bug-free, exploit-free mainnet, time. And now it's got, last I checked, I think we were $350 million in value being streamed across Sablier. So we just take that philosophy seriously, where we're willing to experiment, but the true test of safety, if you want billions of dollars parked in your protocol, is going to be time at the end of the day.
Right. Okay. So what about the audits you mentioned then? What kind of companies are you engaging with to make sure that you have those continual audits being done to make sure the integrity of the code is protected and verified and secure?
So we've got two approaches here. So of course you have your internal processes, but we're going to discount that because an audit is not very effective if it's all the same people that think the same way, saying that their code is really good. So we have a long-standing relationship with QuantStamp. Both they did the original MFT audit for our ERC20. They also have done an audit for Sablier before we acquired them. And so we re-engage with QuantStamp because of that long-standing relationship, and we expect that will continue. But beyond that, we also have personal relationships with individual developers that we reach out to, and it's kind of a scratch your back, we scratch yours, you scratch ours. And so we will actually allocate engineering time where Paul will go and audit other engineers' projects, and then we'll ask them to do the same. And so we actually will get third parties, and there's nothing to really publish around that except the fact that if I'm not willing to park my money in it, then I don't want other people parking their money in it.
Sure.
And so
Sure, and I mean this respectfully, but it would be good also to have some more, objective audits being done so that there is a bit more transparency for the consumer, for the user, of the future.
You cannot get those. You cannot get those right now. You have to choose between working with, so we've got QuantStamp, and we were on their calendar, for about, I think, 3 months for this last one. But since then, if I'm going to schedule an audit today, it will not be ready for 6 months, and you have to commit to a code freeze. So you are 9 months away from actually being able to have a reputable firm come in and do this audit. So it's an interesting time in DeFi, and you either have a long-standing relationship and can kind of jump to the front of the line, or you're waiting. And by the time you release that product, people may have moved on from what you're doing.
Gotcha. Well, it's good to know the devs that you're associated with are also working on these co-audit sort of conversations. And also it'd be great to hear next time we talk, perhaps, where there's more conversations and alignment with other audit providers as well, or audit services, because obviously adding to that stack is going to be important to just give us more confidence that that's going to be a continual thing on your roadmap. Now, one of the things I want to go back to again, in that pre-utility phase, in the beta phase, let's talk about that, Doug, because really that's the guts of what you're doing, as we talked about. And we want to know where you're at, how you're progressing with this team, so you can move to that successful point where the utilities, are given.
So this version of the protocol essentially was built with two engineers, one front end and Paul in the smart contracts. We have since tripled the team. So we've got now 6 engineers all working on it. And so we're in that expansionary period where everybody is getting oriented on the protocol and now getting ready to contribute. Our hope is that we're going to be able to work on more things in parallel to deliver more feature iterations, throughout this coming year. For where the product is at today, right now, we are in public beta. And if you show up and you try and lend out $100,000 on our protocol, it gives you a negative interest rate. And because it's a very, very bad idea to lend out $100,000 on our protocol when there's only $200,000 in liquidity in the AMM underneath the hood. And this is by design, as I previously mentioned. And so right now, the people who are using mainframe are large stakeholders who have invested several $1 million into us, can now take a peek under the hood, see that it's working, and decide, you know what, do I want to divest or do I want to continue and stick on with this team? Is there something here? Right. The next thing we did is we proved that with our team that we've rebuilt from the ground up, we could ship. And it's been a while since mainframe has shipped. And so we felt that was important for the community to see from us. And so, we treat smart contracts like hardware. And so we think there will be a sizable amount of time between our feature iterations, and they should be major features that we add between what we're seeing here today in beta and then what we actually go and launch with. One key thing that you should keep an eye out for is you'll put your thumb down on our confidence whenever we start adding liquidity mining incentives and really pour on the incentives to come and participate. And so that's when you know, like, okay, this is getting real.
So when is that likely to happen? Because I wanted to talk to you about the dip. Obviously, you've seen that recently, very recently, just yesterday or the day before. But I had a look at your charts, and there was this really sudden influx in price, that 4 to 5x move in from December to now. And I thought, okay, normally that happens when you have that real strong utility proof. But you also had those strong backers. There's a strong community. There's a VC and capital community that have been strong and staunch advocates for everything you've been doing. So I wondered, what was that preemptive strike? How did that key market move happen when you're still in that roadmap, long from that proven utility position? You're very transparent about that as well. Mm-hmm. And also there's incentives. I would have naturally thought that those incentive models would reflect that kind of influx then. And it probably will when it happens. But we still saw that major move in the market, December, January move. So what's going on there? I mean, why is the hype so strong? Is it DeFi as the narrative? Is it the speculation? What's going on?
So I have my personal thesis, and I think that's what you're asking for here. And I don't know how true it is, but it's what I use to make sense of the world. But we and when I say we here, Mick and Brad, when they were running the company, they invested a lot into the global community, and they actually went and traveled the world. We did these, token airdrops. Certain people have been very critical of that. But at the time, we had the resources, and I think it was good. We're actually seeing the fruits of their world travel right now. And so if you look at the Korean exchanges, we are the DeFi blue chip of Korea. And they don't have Aave, they don't have Compound, they don't have whatever, but they love MFT. And I think it's like we hit a critical mass, and especially look at where the volume is coming out of. It's Korea. And the number one exchange currency against MFT is the Korean won. Mm-hmm. I don't speak Korean. I need to learn how to, because there's a significant portion of our community who watches me, who watches these changes, and they're the ones who are responsible for this. Right. And so yeah, I mean, it's I think, we put in a lot of effort to build up the community there, Mick and Brad specifically, and I think that's them waking back up and saying, hey, this is our DeFi play.
And it's interesting because I remember watching Mick, fly around the world and really showcase, what mainframe were doing. There was a lot of hype back then, even with just the general state of the market. So it was certainly fitting at the time. But what was interesting also, what you're alluding to here, is those key partnerships, those key exchange relationships, all the things that Mick would have forged very proactively right from the beginning. And that, again, relates to volume. It relates to also key partnerships beyond when it comes to emerging utility like yourselves. But I also noticed as well, there were key stakeholders, for example, in the DeFi community that wasn't known at the time as DeFi, but simply the Ethereum and pro-Ethereum communities, like for the likes of Metacartel, the Laos, those kinds of groups, the cluster VCs, and then there was also the VCs around that. So let's get real about that as well, because they would have also been excited, those parties, in concert with all of this international attention, all the volume, all the usership. Asia definitely is paying attention to mainframe, no question, in terms of the MFT. So what are your thoughts on that? Are they part of that hype narrative as well? Is everyone getting behind this because finally there is a logical direction for the MFT as HiFi?
So, I mean, the logical conclusion that I think people are making with the token is that we now see that there is a value capture mechanism, and that there's a GitHub, and you can actually go and look at the code. And you can imagine that it's trivial for us to add a fee to start buying and burning, whatever whatever the governance decides it wants to accept as the value capture mechanism, and it's plausible. And for the last 2 years, that narrative has either been changing, or it's like, well, where was the value capture mechanism in mainframe OS? Well, it wasn't clear. And to Mick's benefit, he chose to wait to add token utility until we found product market fit. And so it is my privilege to be able to come in, swoop in, and say, you know what? Here's where I think the world of blockchain is headed, DeFi, and it's very easy to capture a percentage of value on the volume of transactions going through if you can find that product market fit.
Got it.
So,
well, yeah. So just to ask you about that, now, obviously I want that to happen for you. I want the team to be successful.
Sure.
And I mean that purely and sincerely as someone who's an advocate for, I guess, the fundamental endeavor of DeFi itself, that objective to try and decentralize finance, change finance, revolutionize finance. Now, as you build out, obviously there's going to be inherent challenges. One of them is the bottleneck itself. So you and many of the, I guess, the backers behind, and also, I guess, the network itself, the community too, are pro Ethereum. Now, we see right now some of the challenges with regards to transactional costs, the fees through the roof. How are you going to sort of mitigate, the challenges there, or how are you going to work through some of the inherent, I guess, barriers to entry for users when we know that for the little guy in crypto, these are serious fees that they have to sort of come up against as they start to engage with real utilities?
It's fair to say that the little guy has been priced out of Ethereum, at least today. And so with that, are we interested in serving the little guy? Well, we knew long ago that the little guy was likely not going to be the amount of volume that we needed to go after. When you look at fixed rate lending, large institutions, as we considered doing a fundraising round last year, many of them, even the people who did, we didn't end up doing the fundraising round, but at the conclusion of our conversations, it was, as soon as this is ready, we want to participate, reach back out and let us know, because they're doing farming and they want predictable returns, or they want predictable terms on their borrowing. So, keep your exposure to Bitcoin, farm it with the stable coin. Mm-hmm. So, when I look at this, I would like to say that I'm not married to Ethereum. I am married to our consumer. And at the end of the day, we've seen that time and time again. We did it with chat. When we delivered our chat application, nobody wanted. And we tried to pivot and find something that people wanted. They didn't want that. And then here we are, we're trying to find something that people wanted. And we hope that it's fixed rate lending. And that's our bet right now. It would be a waste of resources for us to spend a lot of resources on layer 2 solutions right now, because our protocol is still being shaped. And so as soon as we have something that's going to stay, basically unchanged for at least a year, we can deploy it wherever we want. Well, we're happy to follow the consumers.
Let's go there, because I want to hear that kind of comment as well from any CEO, because the users do matter. And obviously the narrative of DeFi matters to a lot of people right around the world, but we're also realists. Now, in the context of Mick, you mentioned CeFi to DeFi. I'm also an advisor to Digifox, which is certainly being real about the space as well, in thinking about users first and always in that sense. Now, you mentioned that you're willing to move. Now, I think there's more in this than you're saying with regard to the plasticity, with regard to the agnostic position, with regard to the reality that's currently we're seeing protocols now emerge that do cater for, I guess, a cheaper experience, a faster experience. And also in that context, we know as well, Doug, that a lot of these layer 2 solutions are a long term away from being viable for the user, irrelevant for the user. And so obviously we're advocates for optimism. We want to see those roll-ups really push out for Ethereum. It's exciting time, but it's a long roadmap. So in that sense, let's get real about how are you going to expand? Are you going to be agnostic and move out into the options you have with, even in the tech bridge sense? That's tough. It's technologically tough to do. So what are your thoughts on how you bridge, especially given Mick has a lot of connections in Asia, a lot of connections in Europe, that international travel means something. So is this going to expand as a global, DeFi protocol, but also underpinned by various technologies?
So in my mind, this may be a boring answer, but it's a very uninteresting question because I don't make this decision. In my mind, it's where the usage is. We will go wherever the users are. It doesn't matter. Like my background is engineering, and I look at this in a very computer way. Like without consumers, I don't have a job. I love my job. I'm going to keep it. So I'm going to put our protocol wherever users are. And so this is not about political, opinions about different blockchain products. For me, it's just about doing what I love. And I feel most validated when there is people using the code and products I help produce. It's all about usage. I'm married to the user. I could care less what the underlying thing is, as do they. I'm aligned with the user.
Got it. Well, I'm going to play the devil's advocate because I do care, because there's tokenized models, there's tokenized systems, the layer zeros, layer ones. And what I mean by that is I care because the community also has built all of their knowledge, all of their understanding, all of their platform experiences through this. And underneath that, there's also the devs. So you have that aspect of all of the people who are aspiring, whether it's CeFi, DeFi, users still matter to them as well. So what I'm trying to understand from you is if users paramount, which I respect entirely, then surely also optimizing the user experience is going to be aligned with your vision as well. And that's what these protocols do. They help optimize, the experience of the user. So can you teach me how are you planning on engaging with the emerging, myriad of options that happen? Because you're agnostic, with your intent, you want to make sure users are number one. Awesome. So how do we then leverage all of the different components of quality blockchains? And I mean this really in the sense of the invisible layer that won't matter to the user, but you still want to, make sure you're at the forefront of that knowledge so that you can best fit those blockchains for your user.
Yeah. So if you are a CEO of another blockchain and you're trying to compete for, Doug Leonard, Mainframe's, HiFi's, business, here's what the formula is. Mainframe has already made considerable investments into Ethereum Solidity engineers. I'm not about to start to rewrite our platform in some other type of code. If the day that I can, one click deploy to your chain, I'll do it. I don't care. And so it's like you have to. So for example, I can't one click deploy to even Binance Smart Chain today, because we rely on certain other service layers that haven't integrated. Right. So it's just not even on the table right now. Right. But as soon as Infura is supporting Binance Smart Chain, hey, now it's an option. And I'm fine to go wherever the users are. Yeah.
I really respect that answer. Thank you for the transparency, sincerely, because I think you're breaking down some of those sort of very, very narrow-minded maximalist narratives when it comes to the potential of things like these DeFi protocols and these lending protocols that you're trying to build, because you're open to the global offering, when it suits you to help fundamentally those users. Now, I guess the thing what I want to ask you now is that you're currently in that beta stage. You're currently in making sure that you can optimize Ethereum's sort of tech base. Now, you mentioned something interesting before, and that you can't really cater for that little guy yet. So is that a barrier? Is that a hindrance? Is that going to be a challenge for you? Because obviously the whole world of speculators are listening, to as different content comes out for HiFi, and many of those are actually like the little guys as well. So how are you going to bring them into the conversation and help allow them to participate?
So quite honestly, we're one of the few fixed rate lending protocols that allows the small guy to participate, and that is through our token. Right now, you can go to a centralized exchange, you can purchase MFT, and you can bet on the outcome. It seems reasonable if we create a value capture mechanism, assuming that demand is constant. The price is likely going to appreciate if we can capture that value and then use it to drive back to MFT. So in my mind, the way that you participate today, and it's the same for big and small, right? Like the economics of what we shipped last week doesn't really make sense for anybody who isn't here to explore, to try and steal my money, which you're both welcome to try to do. And because a lot of good happens if those things happen right now during this period of time. So it is, you can participate until there is, a solution on a chain or a side chain or optimism. Before these things do have their one-click deploy that, Doug Leonard is saying, if you do that, I will go. in my brain, like it's MFT. That is the way you participate.
And I really appreciate this because clearly the roadmap towards optimism being something viable is long-term. You would know that from all the conversations you're looking at and exploring with regard to scaling on Ethereum with those layer twos. And then even the feedback coming from many of the teams that really rely on this are saying the same thing. It's long-term. So speculation essentially for the NFT is really the I guess the interim core point of interest for those speculators because they'll be betting on that pre-utility to make that clear. But I think also I wanted to ask you, knowing that, what about for the institutional? What about for those big players? Is it the same for them? Because in your roadmap, you still have a long way to go until you have that proven utility scenario, even for those big backers and those big players.
Yeah, if you're a large institution and you didn't participate in our pre-sale and you didn't, it seems quite odd that you would have participated, held on, and then all of a sudden we're feeling a need for you because we're something so totally different. But if you're a large institution, when you're buying MFT, you're buying influence and you're buying protection against the governance making a change that's detriment to your business model. And so, why do people hold Aave? Why do people hold Compound? Well, the same reason that you want to hold on to MFT. And so, given that fixed rate lending does, and especially on Ethereum, where you have to have at scale capital to participate, given that fixed rate lending does cater itself much more to those who are going to plan, who aren't just chasing the flash in the pan, whatever the new farming craze is, those institutions are going to want to make sure that they can have influence over the tools that they're using for building out their portfolio.
Got it. And obviously, the tough challenge when we're talking about fixed rate, we're talking about all these different products. And that's going to be another thing. Once you hit the ground running with all the products, that's going to increase in your platform because it's not just going to be the protocol that's the value. It will be the suite of products you offer. But in the interim, as this phase exists between now and that live state that we want to really showcase at some point, you're going to rely also on the support from KOLs, the support from influencers. Even you've mentioned that influence is of many different positions, from the stakeholders all the way down to the front educators like myself, except that I'm not paid to do it. So how are you going to, because Mick had a very strong influencer network, he had a very strong community in that sense. So how are they going to be involved in this, in the marketing approach? Because what we're learning in 221, to be frank, is that KOLs are more than just KOLs now. Some of them are major investors. Some of them are, moving up in the sphere or the space in the hierarchy. So is there going to be consistent, educational support and information to really sustain the understanding of this pre-utility emerging?
So, I mean, there's a couple of things that we've learned from, and there's a lot of ways that I'm different from them. And so one, I think Mainframe, when we were doing, our token generation event, there was a lot of hype, there was a lot of engagement with these key opinion leaders, and there was we would pay to get their attention, and we would, and to engage with them. And so, but for me, it's this sort of thing that we're seeing right now. This is not a paid engagement. And so for us, I make myself available to those who want to have frank conversations and really understand and dive deep and see what's going on at Mainframe. We do AMAs around all of our major events, but I am uninterested in paying shills. It's just not interesting to me as an engineer. And I think that's one of the cadence things that's different is if we're going to engage with people, we want to do it on terms that just make sense, because I have stopped trying to predict, when a certain feature is going to be able to ship. And so it's hard to coordinate. I would rather have confidence than trying to meet an arbitrary deadline because, some influencer is going to be, in his schedule, be promoting us on that week.
Exactly. And you've seen that, obviously, Doug. You've seen that in the history, the way things played out, just generally in the space, where there's itemized, points of media that are designed for price movement. And I think that's why this conversation is so valuable to the community, because it is so transparent, so real. Because at the moment, we're also seeing some of those KOLs become some of those capital firms as well. So that's an interesting sort of, mix and scenario you'd appreciate, because many of these guys in 2017, 18 were used to the $10,000, $20,000 interview fees, as you'd know. So it's great that you're hitting the mark right on the nail when it comes to being real and being straight with the people, because they do need to have that transparency. But by the same token, no pun intended, we also want to see legitimate marketing, legitimate support, like any company would do. So how are you going to do that? Are you going to work on articles? Are you going to keep the work? I mean, I'm happy to do as much as possible for free, but you're also going to need more legitimate people out there supporting you educationally and with information as you keep building these products and this suite of services for your protocol.
So, I mean, I think if you take a look at the animated series that we produced explaining our white paper, you kind of get a taste for, my style here. So for the record, I have never engaged in any paid influencer interview. I've never paid an influencer to interview me. So, just so the record can show that. And I don't plan to. And so what will marketing look like? Well, honestly, I would rather produce high quality content and entertain and engage. So we have a history of doing things like the Lemon Coin video. We have the Hodlers Anonymous video, but we also have these animated series where we took, a Brad and a Lucy, and they were, Brad borrows and Lucy lends, and these things where so many people are asking me, so what do you do? And I'm just like, hey, watch this 1-minute video. It's going to explain everything very simply for you. So that is the type of content that can be reused not only in promoting on social media, but we also can embed it right in the white paper and in our docs to help people, really comprehend what we're doing.
And I really respect that approach. And obviously the marketing is not designed for price, it's designed for information. Every company in the world wants to do that. So in concert with that, here's the big question. Is those real partnerships? Doug, you've seen 1,000,001 partnerships being, announced. That's just a bunch of bullshit. Let's be real.
Oh yeah.
Some of those partnerships are just designed for price appreciation by those two coordinated groups. But then there are some that really focus on legitimate partnerships that are meaningful for the utilities they're associated with. So is that something that we're going to see more of? You as the CEO I'm talking about, because you'd be privy to some of these discussions, we simply aren't. As you move forward, even pre-utility phase now, you still have to have tech partnerships. There's a lot going on. So give us a bit of an insight into what a partnership will mean for HiFi.
Yeah, so you could look at what recently happened just before we were about to launch. Compound had an instance where the USDC DAI peg on Coinbase Pro, America's largest exchange, lost its peg by more than 30%, and it caused massive liquidations for their platform. And in my mind, the answer that the protocol worked as intended, that kind of falls really short of the user experience that's so important. You lost money on that day. You're not caring that the protocol worked. You're trying to find the dollars that are or aren't there. So in my mind, immediately after that happened, we said, okay, how can we mitigate that? And immediately we said, okay, let's change what we were going to target. Instead of targeting DAI, let's target USDC as our asset that you could borrow. But we didn't feel like that was quite enough as we kept looking. And so immediately we set out on integrating with Chainlink. So, so HiFi uses Chainlink. We will continue to use them. And so I guess it's like, is that a partnership? Yeah. I mean, Mainframe pays for their services.
Well, it's integration, definitely integration.
There'll be a joint marketing effort from the two. And so, and we both stand to better ourselves from each other's success. Maybe you could clarify, is there another type of partnership that you'd like me to speak to?
Well, I think you raise a good point, because mentioning Chainlink, that's a tech-related integration. Right. It's also a tech-related, reciprocally beneficial partnership. I mean, I mentioned Chainlink because, I've mentioned this many times in Twitter and in interviews. They do a lot of different partnerships, but they are an oracle. So they become that agnostic core technology. So they can do that, and that they use that as the term partnership, to their very, very effectively, to be honest. They also have a very organic community. But when it comes to people like you, I'm honored to be able to speak with CEOs. So in that respect, it's really just getting it from the horse's mouth, saying, this is what a partnership means to us. This is what an integration means to us. And we are not going to simply just go and put out 1,000,001 partnership labels in our marketing strategy so that you can all FOMO in.
Yeah, I think so material partnerships that I would be excited about. if you see how Compound and Ledger have partnered so that within the Ledger Live app, you can directly lend and borrow on Compound. That would be interesting. I would be interested in that. I would pursue it. Another partnership is the obvious one between Genesis Block and HiFi. Genesis Block is going to be offering high interest savings accounts that is parking your money in safe DeFi custodians. I'm interested. We'll work on it. Another partnership that would be interesting is a barn bridge layer on top of HiFi, where we can put different tranches and potentially there's kind of this trifecta of barn bridge on top of HiFi, leveraging Genesis Block as an onboarding so that Genesis Block is actually purchasing the least risky tranche and then giving DeFi degens the highest reward. But if something were to go wrong, well, the DeFi degens get wrecked, and potentially the customers who park their money in Genesis Block's high savings, high yield savings account, that could be protected. So that's an interesting idea. I would consider that a partnership. I'm very interested in making that happen.
Got it. And you have the connections. That's the exciting thing as well. With this Bedrock platform, this is why I wanted to talk to you, is that you haven't just got this challenge of coming out of the blocks with something new, with nothing behind you. And that's why I'm paying attention, because there are some, there's genuine values potentially in having that pivot scenario. I mean, yes, you still have to win over a lot of people because you are making that pivot.
Oh, sure.
But there's so much value potentially if you get this right. And so, you're hitting the mark so far in terms of transparency, and I do appreciate that. Now, I guess the thing I want to ask you now is, given that we know the roadmap is, long, for that final question is, tell us a bit about the roadmap here now, between now and where your vision is, in terms of concrete and pragmatic objectives, so that we can have a clearer understanding of, okay, if we're a speculator even, where are you going with this, and exactly what is the plan, and can you prove that based on the achievements and the milestones you hit already, and are you on target?
Because part of our thesis causes us to move a little bit slower than other players in the space, I don't think I'm going to take this opportunity to discuss directly what is going to be on the next version of the protocol or on lending, but let me just discuss some ideas that make me excited. And let me tell you that there's a high probability that there's some overlap between some of these ideas.
Okay.
Right now, I'm very interested in experimenting and pushing the limits of what can be collateral. So some things that are very hard to make collateral: NFTs. Very difficult to liquidate on a non-peer-to-peer. And peer-to-peer is uninteresting to me. I want at-scale solutions. And so NFTs at scale, lending and borrowing, that's fascinating. I think your farming positions, you have A tokens, C tokens. I think I wrote about this in the in our white paper. And effectively by using, say Aave wrap Bitcoin, Compound wrap Bitcoin, or Compound wrap Bitcoin, and wrap Bitcoin natively, you effectively can be a fixed rate lending protocol that allows for interest rate swaps. Very interesting. And something a little bit more advanced for some users to understand, but nonetheless, I think it's interesting and worth exploring. And then lastly, also allowing users to short assets. And specifically, we look at all these experiments that are happening. I would love to short some of these experiments. For example, the algorithmic stablecoins. I want to short them all day because if I'm wrong, they just print more of their stablecoin to bring it down to $1. And if I'm right, I just make money because the thing didn't work. So these are some very interesting collateral types that I've got my eye on, and that I would think would be interesting. Other things that would be interesting, I would love to be able to settle our maturity date into other lending protocols that maybe aren't fixed in nature. I think there's a lot of potential there. That way you have more of a perpetual product, and people don't have to set a reminder to come back on their calendars, to babysit their funds. Mm-hmm. So that's taking other farming strategies and allowing those as collateral types. We've got pickles, we've got Yearn, we've got all these different things. They can all be collateralized. That's fascinating. So that's where my head's at right now, and I hope that we at least get some of those before we turn on the faucet and add any liquidity rewards for people to, sort of bootstrap that initial liquidity of our launch.
Got it. And it sounds like to me, listening to you, that it's not just ideas and hope. It sounds like to me that you're not able to disclose too much of some of these things that you want to put in the roadmap later. But at least we know, listening to you, that these are at the very least some things at the forefront of your mind and the team's mind, and that hopefully some of this will unfold in practice and in real time over the course of you iterating throughout 2021 until you get to that point where you really do enable those incentives to really flourish, because you can. Just finally, before we link the socials and talk about the community, I wanted to ask you about compliance, because when you start to talk about fixed rates, when you talk about all these different products that can come on board and tinkering, as you've alluded to in the plan and the roadmap, you quickly come across some of those challenges in the US, for example, with compliance and making sure that you cross the T's, dot the I's. So have you found that difficult? Where does MFT stand in the US context and even in the global context of compliance and regulation?
Yeah, quite a timely question. So the right now we're about to engage with some lawyers. You have to know what MFT is, and it has to become something before you can take a legal opinion on it, right? Mm-hmm. MFT is not what it set out to be, and we have become something much different. And given the fact that if we all agree that in order to get listed on Coinbase, Aave, Synthetics, and MakerDAO, had to qualify with these same legal opinions. And since I've already publicly stated, I'm uninterested in innovating around the token economics, and likely the whole of our token economics would be parts of those three projects. Mm-hmm. At least my very logical mind says, I think we'll fall in the same camp. But yeah, we're trying to get onto some US based exchanges, and the first step in that is to have some legal opinions published and have some defensibility there. So we're just starting down that process, and I'm not sure whether or not that can happen until that infrastructure is built out, or whether or not we can move forward with the idea that we're executing on that. I leave that to the lawyers.
And that's great that you are doing this, to be honest, that you're taking that legal approach first and foremost, especially considering the pivot. And also given that, I guess, the logic behind your alignment with the mentioning of Aave, for example, and many of the others mm-hmm. who definitely have that Coinbase connection. I mean, I'd love to see you on Coinbase, obviously, for many reasons that are utility based. But I also like the fact that they do take that seriously as well, and you're doing so. So congratulations on that stance, that strong and transparent position, and also for mentioning this with regard to not FOMOing in, but being real about the point that you want to be pre-utility into the utility, so people can be pro-utility. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, with regard to the community as well, Doug, obviously people know about Mainframe, but we need to switch into the HiFi narrative now and do it properly. So how are people going to do this? How can we learn more? How can we engage? How can we get clear information and consistent information about the movements that HiFi are doing as a team?
So well, when I say we in this context, since taking over as CEO, I find I follow a very structured pattern with information. I do not like information asymmetry at all. Mm-hmm. And in fact, anyone who talks to me privately asking for any type of information, they probably get annoyed, because the fact is that that's what they get. They said, you know what? I don't like information asymmetry. If I had already publicly, answered this, I would share it with you. But the truth is I haven't. So, mm-hmm. For example, everything follows the same pattern. We typically make a video. The blog post will be around that video with the same content in written form in case you're at work and you're browsing our blog. And then we tweet it out, and then we post it in our Discord. That's the flow. Typically on a Tuesday or a Thursday is when we do major releases, and I try not to deviate from that. Mm-hmm. And so, right now it's a Tuesday. We announced my AMA that's going to be this Thursday, and so it's a burden keeping up with all these projects. So if on Tuesdays and Thursdays you check our Twitter, that's where it'll be. I'm pretty consistent.
And you know what, honestly, mate, thank you for making time. This has been a long interview, and I mean this sincerely, especially now that you've just said that, because basically you're clearly focused on building this protocol, building this platform, building this DeFi, position, so you can eventually showcase real and emerging value for years to come. So for anyone to be able to have this educational conversation, I think it's a privilege, and thank you for your time there. And once again, it's all about having that free flowing and genuinely free interest in utilities that matters for all of us on the blockchain, all of us in the crypto community. So on that note, I'll put all the links for all of the connections you've mentioned, so people can engage, they can be aware of this, and also expect that consistent approach to the release of information through a very arguably rigid approach, but perhaps refreshing, because you're taking a very business sort of frame and mindset to HiFi and the protocol that builds on to build something real. So Doug, thank you again as the CEO of HiFi. Congratulations on managing what is a successful start with the pivot, and also
thank you.
We've seen the price emerge. We've seen the price change. And we've seen the price now, appreciate. And for whatever reason that is, people are paying attention to that, mate. And what I'd like to see now is that translation into that is correlated with utility proof, and that will only take time. So all the best in the future, and hopefully we can catch up again when you aren't busy.
Love it. Thank you so much, Brad.
You're welcome, mate.